Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Well, friends, technology, it is truly revolutionizing the world in so many different ways. And today, we're going to discuss ag tech, but also health tech and just public health overall, because we are rejoined today by Biogene Technology and its managing director and CEO, Tim Grogan, because Biogene Technology covers all these grounds, and critically, the company is on that verge of true commercialization right here, right now, after a 2017 IPO. It's a marathon, not a sprint, as Tim well knows, and we're going to discuss all about that. But importantly, what are the upcoming catalysts? And there is a capital raise, and what the use of funds, how they're going to be applied. And with that long introduction, sorry about that, friends, Tim, welcome back.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Greg, on 180 Markets.
Hey, Tim, Biogene Technology, as I mentioned, you cover a couple of different angles. Maybe just give people a couple-minute overview of the business.
Sure. Well, the simple summary, Greg, is we're developing two natural compounds as insecticides. So they're derived from nature, they have a great safety profile, and, the world is looking for more sustainable options and, want to move away from synthetic chemistry. So we're developing these for use in public health vector control, principally mosquitoes, malaria, dengue, and other problem diseases, and agriculture, grain storage, and consumer applications, which is a really important area that I'll speak to in a moment, and animal health. So what's unusual is we have a really significant range of opportunities, and those target markets are in excess of $40 billion. So, it's all ahead of us and an exciting time.
Right, Tim, as you said, you cover, I believe you listed off there 3 or 4 different target markets, all in themselves can be certainly company makers. But maybe you have 2 big products, Flavocide and Qcide, whichever one you want to start with, maybe just give a little bit of overview of that specific product, and then we could take that to how it's targeting those markets.
Sure. So the 2 assets the company has, as you rightly point out, are called Qcide and Flavocide, and both of these compounds are derived from nature. So there's a particular type of eucalypt that we've developed that's in the picture behind me. And the leaves of these compounds actually contain large quantities of a particular active that, we extract through steam distillation. And that product's called Qcide, 100% natural and certified for organic production in the US, and we'll be able to leverage that into other markets. So that's really, well suited to consumer applications around the house, where that fully natural pedigree with organic certification is in demand. The other compound is present in very small quantities, but we're able to produce it synthetically in a way that's identical to the natural version. So it's called a nature identical compound, and that's called Flavocide. So when you think about the big target markets in agriculture and public vector control in mosquitoes and other areas, that's actually what you want. You want a product that you can scale very rapidly and use in those big target markets. So it's nice to have these 2 assets spread across quite different market segments.
Right, and let's go back to Qcide. Qcide, where does this stand from a regulatory point of view?
So both Qcide and Flavocide are regulated products in Australia. So there's a standard development path. It's very straightforward. You basically produce safety studies, and we're now around about 75% through that process with Flavocide, and we'll file our first regulatory dossier with the Australian regulator called the APVMA around March next year. So a really significant catalyst in terms of news flow and further partnering. It also means that places like Singapore and Malaysia, they look to the Australian regulators' review, so we can then get approval into those territories very quickly. Similarly with Qcide, what we've decided to do is introduce what I call a quick-to-market strategy. And interestingly, because Qcide is 100% natural, we're actually worked out we can bring it to market later this year in Japan in the household nuisance insect pest category. And in that market, as long as you're not going on to food crops and you're not targeting vectors of disease, you can go straight to market because we have all of the required safety and efficacy data. So that's been a really successful strategy, and we're currently in the process of doing a deal with Sumitomo Corporation and a company called Nakashima. And Nakashima has been in that segment for over 20 years and knows exactly how to launch and take those products to market. So really, really great relationship set up for the long-term success for Qcide and potentially Flavocide in Japan as well.
Right. And for people that don't know, these are very large corporations in Japan. And Japan, uh, forgive me, off the top of my head, I don't know the precise population number, but I believe it's 100 million people. So certainly a very big target market, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So the household consumer market in Japan is very, very attuned to natural products, and at the moment there's nothing available in that category that is derived from nature. And Nakashima have said to us, this is a perfect scenario. We've got an Australian pedigree product derived from a particular type of eucalyptus, 100% natural, and it's got a new mode of action, which is tremendously important and patent protected and certified organic. He said there is nothing in Japan that comes close to it, to having a pedigree like that. So, they're very excited by the potential for Qcide in the Japan market.
And in your crystal ball of upside here, say right now, as we're discussing in May of 2026, let's fast forward Qcide to May of 2027. What would you like to see?
Yeah, sure. So, we'll be scaling Qcide. We're rapidly, needing to increase production. And, if you think about launching and first revenue in Q3 and then first product sales in Q4, the scramble now is to produce more of the oil and produce more of these plants. So what we're already doing is, scaling that, and we'd like to go much faster with that. And on the other hand, Flavocide will be the subject of our first regulatory submission in Australia. So, that then goes into a review period of the Australian regulator, but that opens up the potential for more partnering discussions, because when you reach that filing point with the regulator, there are a number of companies that have said to us, hey, that's at a time we'd like to engage. So, it's going to become very busy over 2027.
Right. And also it sounds like there are a lot of, I would say, where uses of where you get one approval, it helps towards the next approval down the track.
It does. That's right. Now, Greg, the thing that I want to emphasise is that first use for Flavocide is around public health. But as you can imagine, when you move into food crops and things like that, you generate additional data. So the nice progression is that, let's face it, mosquitoes are a huge unmet need, and vector control could be, if we wanted to be, the only category we go after. But as it happens, we've got a much bigger opportunity. So that's a stepping stone for us into the US EPA system, where we will produce some environmental and EFATE data and be able to increase our exposure to food crops, agriculture, horticulture, and also consumer applications.
Right. And Tim, what people may not know, mosquitoes, obviously we know them as very annoying little bugs, if you will, and nobody likes them on their skin. But from a crop perspective, they can be very destructive, can they not?
Well, yeah, so mosquitoes, are vectors of disease primarily. So think about those in the category of public health control. And, the activity of Flavocide and Qcide is primarily directed to flying and crawling insects of a whole range of types. When you're talking about crops, they estimate that around 20 to 40% of crop yield is lost through, this insect attack. And the focus that the world's going to have on the need to produce more food with a growing world population and less arable land, this is going to become an even bigger problem than it is today, and the price of food will increase, as a result. So efficient production is, critical, and also reducing the impact of insects. Whilst mosquitoes are, primarily in the carriers of disease side, and they're the most dangerous animal that have ever lived, which is really scary to think about. But there's a whole range of other crawling and flying insects, and in grain storage, that's an area where there's a lot of resistance that's built up, so the current compounds are becoming highly ineffective, as is happening with mosquitoes. But in grain storage, there's some really nasty chemicals used there, and there's a great demand for a new mode of action and a new natural compound. So that's a really nice dynamic for a company like Biogene to have ahead of us.
Right. Tim, now, Biogene, as we were discussing, you're on the cusp of commercialization here. How does the business model work? In other words, how does Biogene make money?
Yeah, so it's very similar to a biotech company in that, we're an innovator. We develop these assets, we patent them. We've got 46 patents and patent applications across 7 patent families. There's a lot of IP under the bonnet. So we partner with the big manufacturing companies, and they typically undertake formulation, distribution through to the marketers. And so what we're able to do is license our data and all of the IP to our partner and generate upfront milestone and royalties on net sales that they make to their partners. And the royalty rates might typically be in the 5 to 12% range, but each one you'll appreciate is a separate negotiation.
Right.
But the interesting thing about, the Biogene business model, and one reason that I was attracted to it, I joined the company 2.5 years ago, and it's very unusual to have that range of opportunity. But in addition to that, in addition to the return on royalties, what we're able to do is supply the active, that is Qcide or Flavocide, and generate a significant margin on that because we manufacture it and own all of the IP. And that additional revenue line kicks in earlier, as our partners will, complete their formulation work and build inventory ahead of launch. So that's actually, really icing on the cake. And it'd be unusual for a biotech company to have that, but we've been successful in executing that twice already in with our commercial partners.
It certainly sounds exciting. Now, for investors who want to participate in this growth journey, you are raising capital. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we've just announced, a trading halt, and we're undertaking a placement and a share purchase plan at the moment, and that'll take us through to late next year. So it'll happen as part of a placement with 2 tranches. We'll have an EGM at the end of the second tranche, and we're really excited to build out our register and bring in some new shareholders, because, as I said at the beginning, this actually is a really key stage for the commercialisation process. A lot of these companies do take longer to get to market. It's quite a common phenomenon, but now's the time to jump on board.
Right. Tim, we know these days are very busy for you. There's a lot action-packed in there. We really appreciate your time on such short notice. And also for investors, feel free to reach out if you also want to participate. Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Greg. Cheers.
Bye-bye.